let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. First off, thanks everybody for attending. We're going to be very good stewards of your time, but we want to make sure that this committee gets exactly what is needed to be accomplished in the right way and take the right time to do that. So I would like to call it to order, and I'd like to specifically call to order the Kentucky Community and Technical College System Board of Regents Audit Committee meeting. And I'm going to ask Ms. Duncan to please call the roll now.
Chair Cox.
Here.
Vice Chair Hamilton. Regent Girdler. Regent Herdink.
Here.
Regent Hodges.
Here.
Regent Jackson.
Here.
Regent McGraw.
Here.
Regent Stevens. All right, we have a quorum. We may proceed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pam. Appreciate that. So the minutes have been distributed to everyone. Are there any corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, the minutes will stand approved and we'll move right ahead. I'd like to call on Pam to present this action agenda item regarding the revisions to the Audit Committee Charter and KCTCS Board of Regents bylaws. So, and I'll give you a warning in advance that at the end of this meeting, it's one of my practices to call on you individually to make sure that you don't have any questions or comments to make. So you might want to write down one or two as we go, because I don't let the meeting end without everybody saying something. I like to be able to report out to the board that everybody on the audit committee had their voice and used it. So just one of my quirks. So Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. This is the second time this has been on the agenda, because this is the second reading of the charter revisions and the bylaw revisions. They will go to the full board next week, as Chair Cox said, and we will vote on the changes to the charter and the revision to the bylaws then. Basically, the revisions are simply this, that the makeup of the audit committee will remove the two external members and will move forward with solely those members who are actual regents, either appointed or elected regents. So we have a mixture of elected and appointed regents on this audit committee, and we will no longer have external members. When it comes to the bylaws, the changes there, note the change in the makeup of the audit committee, but we also made a little change to the bylaws that is unrelated to the audit committee, and that is that expulsions and suspensions for students no longer need to come before the board, because that was a change in the law. And KCTCS was exempted from that requirement. So now they go through due process still at the local committee level and the system committee level, but they do not have to come before the board. And so those are the extent of the changes, and you saw those previously. And if you are all in favor of those, we can take a vote to move those forward to the full board.
Just a couple of questions that I think we ought to consider here. Number one, and Lance, maybe you can help us with this. Is this best practice from the standpoint of institutions of higher learning, from the standpoint of no independent external members sitting around that? And the second part of that, Pam, is do we have people who are in that we have to say goodbye to? And will we be notifying them? And how will we say thanks for your service, but you're out?
So Lance, if you don't mind, I'll take the easiest part first, and that is that we did have two external members, Mr. Hall and Ms. Schott, or Scop, excuse me, and we have already notified them and thanked them, and that is all behind us, so to speak.
Great.
Hey, Chair Cox, this is Barry. Let me answer that for Lance, because actually it was during our internal audit that we talked about this, and it was a recommendation or a point of discussion from the internal auditors that we probably wouldn't need outside outside committee members, and that they actually kind of recommended that maybe we don't. And that's why we come to that conclusion, or this recommendation.
Yeah, so I can just add on to that. So I wouldn't say it's best practice to have or not to have external board members or external members of the committee. It's a might. The things that I recommend on an audit committee are somebody who is a financial expert and someone who understands what both external audit and internal audit and what their role should be. And there also needs to be some group who can help affect change if we believe that if we make recommendations or bring to you any findings that could warrant changes. But the biggest thing that I do recommend is somebody who is some form of financial controls, business type expert. And if you don't have that on your board, you should bring in outside assistance to the committee.
Great.
And I think we had a hard time filling those 2 slots anyways from an external standpoint. I'm sorry, Pam, you had your hand raised. Apologize.
No, and that's what I was going to say. The intent behind it when the board changed it was to fill that outside need that they didn't feel at the time that we necessarily had available to us. But also, ultimately, they were supposed to roll over to other members eventually. And these were non-voting members. They were just advisory in nature. But we ended up having the same members over and over for the period of time that we had because nobody nominated themselves and nobody nominated anyone else. So it was kind of difficult.
Yeah, and Chair Martin, I appreciate those comments because I think it's difficult when you have external people. My take on it is anyway that you're also putting your confidentiality at a little bit further risk. Even the best people that you can have on there externally are not going to be bought in the same way. So I mean, I think this is a right move. I just didn't want to take any criticism from people or others about why are you trying to get, why are you trying to narrow the scope down? And I think hearing it from the way it was proposed from the internal suggestions makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure why we even broadened it out to that. But I felt like pulling it back in was the right thing to do. And I think the external auditors and I thought the same way. And so when they brought it up, it was perfect timing.
Yep. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions on that? The second piece of that, Pam, that had to do with the process around students.
Yes.
If you give me just the salient parts of that, because I think it'd probably be smart for us to hear from students on this. Before
Certainly. So basically, they're part of 164, which is our chapter of statutes and the title for higher education, required that all expulsions and suspensions of any students would go forward through all of the processes, local college processes, which require going to your chief student affairs officer and then taking it on up and going through the appeals process that is in the student code of conduct. And then if you did not locally receive the outcome that you felt was appropriate, then you would go to the full system-wide committee. Then the statute required the ability to take it to the board for suspension and expulsion. But previously, last year or the year before, it was actually during COVID, so I think it's been 2 years now, There was a statutory change, and in that statutory change, there was a lot more due process that was required of the four-year institutions. For instance, if you were a student organization or had something going on, for instance, in a fraternity or a sorority, and then there were certain obligations for due process that had to go, the 4 years had to go through, and then take it to the board. But we indicated to the legislature that we have so many different types of students. So we have students who are here under federal programs like Ready to Work. We have students here who are workforce solution students who are not enrolled students and wouldn't really be subject to the student code. We have adult basic ed students. So we felt like it was confusing in many ways, and that we also needed the flexibility for those students who were not actually classified as students in the student code for us to be able to say, hey, we've got to meet the requirements of the grant or the federal contract that we have. We can't keep this person in this program because they did X, Y, and Z, which violates this contract. So they exempted us entirely from that statute, and we are not free to violate people's rights. So I want to make that very clear. What we are free to do is to set our due process accordingly, and we have done so in our student code. And therefore, we are removing that part that was statutorily based in the bylaws.
So in essence, it's a streamlining of the process that gives a bit more autonomy within some guidelines, within some guardrails for us.
Exactly.
So Leah, I'm going to ask you to jump in and give us what your thoughts are that we need to hear on this, if you have those.
Not gonna lie, I'm kind of confused, a little all over the place. So I'm just here to try to process things, and that's essentially all I have to say at this moment.
Okay, that's fair. And I think that the salient point for me is that we do keep the students' rights in mind as we establish this and as we go forward. And that's where we'll really need a whole lot of your input to make sure that we are doing that. Joe, how about you? I know you're right at kind of the point central of a lot of this. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, honestly, working in IT, anything we can do to streamline a process, we should streamline the process. As long as we're checking the boxes and doing all the right things, it looks like we are doing that here. So I'm on board.
Good deal. Anybody have any other questions around that? If no discussion, I'll call for a motion on these action items regarding revisions to the Audit Committee Charter and KCTCS Board of Regents bylaws.
I'll make a motion.
So
This Barry.
Second.
We have a second, and I'll call on Pam to give us a vote on this.
Chair Cox.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hamilton.
Aye.
Regent Girdler is not here. Regent Herdink.
Aye.
Regent Hodges.
Aye.
Regent Jackson.
Yes.
Regent McGraw.
Aye.
Has Regent Stevens arrived? No. And Regent Martin.
Aye.
Of the members present, the vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Very good. Thank you, Parliamentarian Duncan. I appreciate that. Appreciate everyone's input. Moving forward, I'm going to ask Buddy to present the update on the internal audit plan for fiscal year 23-24.
I don't think Buddy's here.
Well, that's problematic. So we'll just call on Lance.
I'd be glad to. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Absolutely. Let me say, let's call on Lance and Christopher. Let's not forget Christopher in the equation.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
So I was going to say, I do have my colleague Chris Boylan here, who manages the bulk of the work on behalf of KCTCS and Dean Dorton. And if I mess up anything, he'll correct me.
That'll be fun to watch.
Let me. Share. All right. Can y'all see that?
Got it.
Perfect. So I believe everybody on the call knows me, but my name is Lance Mann. I do have Chris on the call with me. I serve as the internal audit director for KCTCS, and Chris is the manager. We're here to present the results of our work, which really go through September 30, 2023. We're just always a few weeks behind for the audit committee whenever these meet. In terms of what we audited during this time period, you'll see here, and just to give everybody, Q1 is always a shorter period because the audit plan doesn't get approved until around, I believe it was in August this year. And so it's always a shorter audit period, but we audited Bluegrass Community and Technical College, their business office, Gateway Community and Technical College, their business office. Our goal is every 3 years to audit the business office of each of the individual colleges. And then we performed some IT, information technology, key control testing, and typically once a year or so, we will do on each of our internal audit clients what we call a critical IT process resiliency. And I'll go through that with you when we get to that summary. In terms of a summary of our findings, you'll notice here, Bluegrass and Gateway Community and Technical College, very clean business office audits, which would be not necessarily expected, but those are both very mature business offices, highly talented individuals running those business offices, and highly talented presidents there, good controls in place, and they're following the recommended controls that the system office deploys to each of the colleges. We do have a couple of things we're going to talk about more in depth in the information technology space as we go through it. For everybody on the call, please ask questions as we go through it if you have them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on BCTC or GCTC. We did not have any findings. In essence, in the business offices, we audit cash controls, controls over certain HR-related matters, controls over emergency response plans, segregation of duties, property and equipment, pro cards, bank reconciliations, and purchasing and budgets and things like that. So these two colleges had very good controls over those areas, and we had no findings. In terms of IT, one of the things you'll notice about your internal audit department at KCTCS is about 50% of the audit work performed is in the IT space, and we perform a significant amount. During this quarter, you can see here in those blue boxes at the top of the screen, the areas that were included in the IT testing this year around audit log failure, baseline configurations, change management, IT security, specialized training, portable storage devices, and protection of backed up data. And all of these things are generally geared towards making sure that KCTCS's information is safe and secure. Some of the strengths we identified is that you all have a very strong monitoring of audit logs for capturing data that's working as intended. Your baseline configuration standards are well defined and are being applied to the system. That in essence means that each of the computers that KCTCS has system-wide are generally set up with the same baseline configuration standards and then customized slightly based on individual user needs. And the IT personnel with security responsibilities are receiving the appropriate training or utilizing resources to ensure they stay current with cybersecurity threats and risks to the environment. So good strengths there. We had a couple of observations we like to point out here. So I did point out a strength as your team is getting good training around the environment. They're utilizing resources to stay current with cybersecurity threats. But the processes and resources utilized are very decentralized and dependent upon individual users determining what was appropriate for their role. And with KCTCS being KCTCS is a very mature information technology control environment. You should be applauded for it. You've been ahead of the game for many years in the IT space. But one thing you've not defined yet for KCTCS is what they call the CISO role, the Chief Information Security Officer role. Why is that important? It's really important to have a dedicated person that is solely in charge of security, solely in charge of thinking about the authority to improve the security program that you have in place. Somebody in charge of making sure that individual team members are getting the training, making sure that the department has the resources they need to have the appropriate security program in place, and those sorts of things. You're doing a lot of the things, if not all of the things that you should be, but you don't have that one person kind of monitoring for any future things that need to be done or gaps that need to be filled, and making sure that the humans on the team are getting the training they needed. So Chris has gave a very thoughtful response here to evaluate the existing talent and the most appropriate approach for addressing the need for a CISO role. And Chris, I don't know if you want to comment any further on that. I believe you're on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Yeah, the CISO role, we have that in function, but not in name. And so I think, to Lance's point, we really need to get that more formalized. For those of you who have tried to recruit and retain a CSIO, you know it's a very difficult position to recruit and retain in today's technology environments. So we're going to look internal to see what skills and talents we have inside KCTCS to see if we can fill that role. If that doesn't work out, then we'll start looking external to fill that role. But it's a very important role, and I appreciate Lance highlighting the need for us.
And Chris, one thing to think about, one of the up and coming, one of the new outsourced roles that some entities are providing are the virtual information security officer, and we call it a VISO. And some companies in the talent attraction world we live in have had to outsource that role to make sure that it's being filled.
So Lance and Christopher, unfortunately, you're dealing with somebody who's still dealing with the after effects of a cyber attack. And so a lot of things come to mind. Are you going to talk about, or did you all look at records and document retention policies and adherence to those?
It's a good question. Well, as it relates, what do you mean as it relates to, well, look, Pam has a question. Russ, I will answer that.
Okay.
So there are two issues at play, I think, with this. And if we're talking about the length of document retention, that series is set for us by the Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives, and it's a universities and colleges series. So we are guided by what type of record it is and how long we have to retain it. So that's the first issue. Then the other issue on that is if they are other types of documents that might have legal ramifications, then we extend the KDLA retention series requirements by other statute of limitations requirements. So for instance, if a particular action has a 15-year statute of limitations, we would say you need to keep this for 15 years. So those are the legal requirements. Now, if there was some other component, technology component on the other side, I will defer to my colleagues and to Lance and Christopher.
The other thing that I would add there, Pam, is that we are also looking at data retention as part of the data strategy Huron priority. And so we'll be wrapping data retention and everything around policy and procedure into the data strategy Huron priority as well. But Pam's exactly right. Most of that is guided by state guidelines and regulations that we have to follow.
So, and I'm sorry, I can't see if anybody else has their hand up. I don't want to butt in, but the question that I have, and I understand, I think that's great. How do we audit ourselves on that to make sure that we are compliant with those policies?
And Russ,
one of the things we experienced, we had really good policies, but we didn't necessarily do exactly what those policies said sometimes. And so is there a way that we check ourselves on that via the audit process to say we're only retaining that which we have to, and we're following the policy about, cleaning up everything else in there?
So Russ, we do audit right now, focusing on the IT space. There's document retention could go
right
ad nauseum, and I can't say that we've done just a document retention policy standalone and sampled across all departments, which we could do, and we could add that to the audit plan. But what I did want to point out to you, as I mentioned, during this quarter, these are the areas we tested. When we do the testing in these areas, we do a couple of things. The first thing we do is we obtain KCTCS's policy as it relates to these areas and any other areas that we audit. If there is no policy, we've got a pretty easy recommendation to make. You need a policy, because all of the things we audit come from national standard. It's the acronym is NIST, NIST, and I am not a NIST expert. That's why I've got team members who are. But our audit plans are developed from NIST, best practices, minimum requirements, things that you have to have in place. And then we make sure KCTCS has those things. And within each of those areas, we get the policy, we get the process documentation, because especially in the IT space, if not in every department, the process for handling this thing should be very well documented in case you have turnover, in case you've got new people trying to learn the role, all the things. So we make sure that the processes are all well documented. And then we also look at what information you're documenting as it relates to those processes on an ongoing basis. And you'll see in a minute, I've got a sort of an observation around documentation that I'll comment on. And then we look at the retention of that data in those individual areas. As I mentioned, here's number 2 right here, baseline configurations. KCTCS does a good job of reviewing and updating baseline configurations, and you have a policy around reviewing those on an annual basis. However, there's no evidence that those reviews are actually happening. So is KCTCS following the policy of that annual review? We couldn't obtain evidence for that, which is why it's a finding here. Change management's another area. You utilize a number of third-party solution providers for many of the systems used. As a part of that, the third-party service providers are required to have adequate change management policies in place, because those systems are interacting with your systems. And what we noted was that the systems managed by KCTCS are not covered by a change management policy, and we've recommended, obviously, that KCTCS develop a change management policy for those third-party service provider systems. Makes sense so far? Any questions? One other area we've made some recommendations here is around protection of backed up data. And so we do believe that in most cases, KCTCS is meeting the expected requirements to protect the confidentiality and integrity of backed up data for essential systems. Why is that important? One of the main reasons it's important these days is if you do have some form of cyber attack or cyber incident, you've got secure information that you can restore from, and you've got to have secure information that hasn't been compromised by some other cyber incident or some long-term cyber incident. And so, excuse me, in most cases, KCTCS is meeting the expected requirements there. There was one opportunity we bring here as it relates to increasing the level of assurance of this control as it relates to Blackboard specific data. And making sure that you're understanding that the controls that are in place at Blackboard, but also the user control considerations that Blackboard expects for KCTCS to have in place so that Blackboard's controls work appropriately. And so our recommendation is to review and understand the controls that Blackboard has in place along with the user controls, meaning the KCTCS controls that are in place that must work so that Blackboard systems work appropriately. And management's working on that this next month.
So, quick question here. I mean, in is Blackboard, what actually is Blackboard?
The classroom system that I'm certain somebody on this call can answer better than me, but it's a system used in the classroom.
Okay, so is it password sensitive?
Yes.
You have to have a password to access it?
Yes.
Okay, and so is there education done around password protection around
Yes.
this? Okay, great.
Yes. Now, with education comes follow-up education and more follow-up education and communication and all of those things. And we do test that to make sure that you all are communicating and testing that folks know what they should and shouldn't be doing. But you're still dealing with humans.
Right.
I would say now this is the one time I can give feedback during the call, at least specifically talking about when it comes to security regarding Blackboard, and then as a student being able to access the MyPath or the portal that students use to read their emails, look at financial aid, schedule for classes, things of that sort. At least at Jefferson, I know that we do have a training every year that we have to go through as we're starting in the fall semester. Recently, we've had to do the multi-factor authentication through Microsoft Authenticator. So that requires us to log in to our MyPath using our student emails, passwords, and then everybody pretty much has a cell phone nowadays. So they'll send a code to your phone that you can either put in via computer or just answer via a call. Additionally, Jefferson also sends out phishing scams pretty often, just letting us know that since we are an institution, we do get a lot of phishing emails, but once the students know how to recognize them, we let our coordinator know. They send an email to the entire student body, just letting us know of those scams. And then I think this happened at my job, but there was a training to where this may be impactful for other schools, where we were sent a fake email by our employer. And if we clicked on the link in the email, what we had to do was go through an official training to say, hey, as an employee in this type of industry, you need to recognize these different signs so that you don't give away anybody's personal information, things of that sort. So you could even send an email to students during the middle of the year, even though it looks like it's from somebody in KCTCS, at least it's going to be from us and not like a fisher actually trying to get any information.
Chris, I know you do that for employees. Do you do that for students?
Yes, Lance, we do. Are you talking about multi-factor authentication or security training awareness? The answer would be both. Yes to both of those. Okay.
I was talking about the awareness training and the testing.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that. Perfect. That's really important.
I would also say from the employee perspective, you know, we have vector trainings every year, and part of that is policy acknowledgement regarding various things, and IT proper use would be one of those as well. That comes up on people's annual trainings too.
Yeah, unfortunately, the world's gotten to a place where these folks are really good at looking like they're within your world, and there's not a lot of intent to hurt, but employees in their zest sometime to help or comply can be fooled by it. So as much education as we can give, the better.
Yeah, and the other one is, and we mentioned it earlier, but one of the new waves of the games is through third parties. And so, your vendors trying to help bad actors get through, not help, but inadvertently help bad actors get through.
Very good point.
Which is a good entree to this next area around critical IT process resiliency. And so, in essence, what that means is how resilient is KCTCS to change? How resilient are you to employee turnover? How strong, is your team, so to speak? And it's something that we do periodically, really just to give you data. These aren't real findings, so to speak. They're really to give you data as you do strategic planning in this area, as you consider risk areas, things you want to invest in, those sorts of things. And the first one here, you'll notice nobody likes the color red. I know Chris didn't like the color red, but it was around Active Directory management and identity management within that system. When we performed the audit, the position that was in charge of performing this role had been vacant, which is what made it high. Since then, KCTCS has hired somebody who has accepted the role. I believe they started 2 weeks ago, Chris. Hopefully they did start to fill that role. So with that fill, the red would actually turn to an orange, because we also think you need a backup to that role, because it's a very important role that's filled. Now, we also recognize the difficulty in hires and cost savings, but we would recommend having a backup in this area. A couple of areas that were of lower risk, just to note, is in the Azure, Microsoft 365. Very low risks here. Your team, is well maintained. They understand it. They've been around a long time. Good documentation. Same in Blackboard. Staffing is at the right level. Good documentation in this space. The emergency notification system, enterprise proxy systems. Let's take those. So in emergency notification system, process owners have good years of experience. There's good cross training there. In the enterprise proxy system, we did note that there was no formal documentation for training new personnel. There is some cross training in place with the enterprise team, but not for all processes. And so there's some areas that could be improved there. For PeopleSoft, process owners do have a good trainer with training materials from PeopleSoft. For those who don't know, PeopleSoft is your enterprise resource planning system. They also have your campus solutions area. However, there is a position that's been vacant since January, February. The responsibilities have been assumed by another person, but there's really no capacity for turnover in that space. And after we finished our audit, we did note that there was a position posted and accepted, and that person started in early November, which would have brought this area down to a yellow low, which is what you want. In the finance area, process owners have many years of experience. There's good documentation. However, the area has a number of personnel brand new to the area, and there's an expectation of retirements over the next few years. And so, gonna need to start doing some planning around the finance side, which you already knew about, but bringing that up. In the HR space, low risk there. You do have one person that's available for retirement, but no plans currently, but good team members in place there. For Microsoft configuration, there's only one person performing the processes. There are two that have backup. It's been a few years since the backups have, the people who were there to backup have come in and done these processes. So it'd probably be good for them to get back up to speed on current processes and training. And then in network monitoring, low risks there. good processes, good documentation in place there. Any questions on the IT resiliency work?
All good.
All right. A couple other things I like to go through in these conversations. One is our follow-up on prior action plans. As we came into this quarter's audit, there was only one item left open that needed to be completed. That item was completed during this period, so 100% of prior findings have been remediated up to this date.
That actually got pushed out.
No, I'm sorry. We didn't update this table. So there's one that's not due
We
yet.
talked to Buddy and that's been pushed out to April. So
I'm sorry.
And just to offer some clarification, I know it came up from the Southeast Kentucky Community College audit that we performed. We've left it as that name because that was the audit where it showed up, but it is being worked on in the system office by Pam and her team. So.
Got it. And this recommendation is around a conflict of interest policy for all employees in some form of financial position. It was a recommendation we made back in March of 23. It's not as easy as just creating a new policy and deploying it. You already have a similar policy for Board of Regents members, but that's governed by Kentucky laws and regulations. We recommended one for anybody that has a financial role within the institution, the employees. And then finally, our internal audit plan update. As you can see here, and this is non-IT related audits. I've got another page for IT related audits. We finished the work we had planned to do in Q1. We're in the process of doing a whistleblower hotline awareness survey to understand how many employees understand your whistleblower hotline and how available it is and what to use it for. We're doing an audit over the marketing department, an audit over disaster response and active shooter preparedness plans, really understanding how campuses have implemented and deployed the plan that the system office has put out. We're doing some work on student financial aid. I learned yesterday that audit's actually going to be moved to Q4. There's being sort of a reorganization done in the student financial aid space. So we're going to look at doing that audit in May of 2024 instead of this coming quarter. We're planning to do an Owensboro and Madisonville audit this coming quarter. In the IT space here, you can see here, we've got 6 or 7 audits planned over different areas. And if you're interested in all the different areas that we are going to audit in the IT space here, you can see those listed here over the next 3 quarters. Does anybody have any questions or comments or things they'd like us to do differently or better?
Might not be the correct venue, but when is sort of an audit process for sort of like personal security? And I'm kind of liking it to our high schools, specifically in Jefferson County, who are now ramping up to have, metal detectors to help, improve the safety of students while they're in the classroom and on the campuses. When does that process happen at the sort of JCTCS system?
So we can add that to the audit plan. The first step in any internal audit step is going to be, does KCTCS have a policy or procedure that's mandatory around this for JCTC? And if they do, we can certainly audit around it. But our first recommendation would be, if there's not one, we would make a recommendation for KCTCS to adopt a policy, or JCTC to adopt a policy around those types of security efforts. Excuse me. But if there is one, we can definitely audit it and add it to the plan anytime. At the beginning of each fiscal year, we do a risk assessment and comprehensive internal audit plan. And I don't believe that's on the plan for this year, Chris, but the active shooter preparedness training did make it on the list this year to be audited. that make sense?
Yes.
Well, we can do ad hoc audits anytime, but for us to audit it, we would need the policy first.
Thank you.
But I can recommend security consultants if y'all need to create one.
You know, Lance, it's always this fine line that I think we tread over, you know, what is management's responsibility and our admonition to them to do these things versus coming from the board. And, you know, any guidance you can give us on those things as to what's best practice around that, I think it'd be helpful as we go. We don't have to do it today, but, you know, I mean, how management kind of leads us through making certain that campuses are as safe as they can possibly be may have a different flavor by facility, but be governed by the president from the standpoint of overall philosophy. And I want to make sure that we're not stepping places we shouldn't step, but we are holding accountable leadership for the right things being in place. I know I sound like I'm contradicting myself.
No, I agree with you. And in this case, I would fully assume that JCTC would have a completely different policy than Hazard Community and Technical College or Madisonville Community and Technical College, and would fully support and recommend that JCTCS has the authority within Pam's purview to create and adopt their own policies around this, that we could then come and audit to make sure that they're following the policies that they've adopted on that campus.
Right. I agree. So kind of wrapping up, I always ask this question, and it's always an uncomfortable one. From where you are in this process of the audit, which we still have a distance to go, what things should we be most concerned about from what you have told us today?
Nothing. I mean, the biggest risk in my mind that I could point to today for KCTCS is resolution of the state auditor's report and understanding what ramifications could come from that, which is outside of my purview, but you asked, so I bring it up.
Yeah.
The reorganization of student financial aid is a risk. It's outside of information technology. Student financial aid is the biggest risk to KCTCS in compliance with all of the laws and regulations associated with student financial aid. Colleges live and die off student financial aid, and you've got to make sure it's done right. And so that reorganization, making sure that it's done right, making sure the right people are well trained, and we're going to audit it later, but making sure that they have the right training and the right skill sets in place. And third, the significant leadership changes that are happening at KCTCS with the president and the future need for a CFO. And I think there's some HR needs that may need to be filled at some point. You've got a lot of senior transition happening, and making sure that those go well and go right, and making sure that the policies and procedures, that they understand them and all that. Those are the biggest risks I see to KCTCS as it stands today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think you're spot on those. And I think from a governance perspective, the last one that you talked about is the one that we can be hopefully the most facilitative of around, you know, being supportive and helping happen as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. I think, you know, as far as it relates to the second one, you know, a question I would have for you is, you know, are we staffed appropriately to be able to uphold that responsibility around that compliance with the student aid program? Because it is the lifeblood of what we are. And I know we don't typically, I mean, we look at benchmarks as to what others are doing. I know Huron's going to weigh in, but from where you as auditors sit, are we staffed appropriately in order to run a compliant, successful financial aid area?
Historically, you have been. I think you've had a retirement in the space, which is driving the reorg. And so that's why I bring up, I don't have a real concern about it, but it's a risk making sure that this reorganization is done right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But you all have had a very clean student financial aid department for many, many years. I've been in for the 10 or 15 years I've known KCTCS. Y'all have had a clean student financial aid department. You've had a finding here and there, but nothing substantial.
Okay, any
Hey,
other?
Pam,
Go ahead, Barry.
hey, Pam, so we should have the same kind of policies and procedures that the colleges have at the system center as well, system office, right?
So actually, we should have system-wide policies and then college level policies that do not contradict system-wide policies. And so that's why Lance and Chris were talking about auditing the local policies to ensure that they do not conflict with that. I would love, I think, in talking with them, they often ask what are our risks. I do think that we need a system repository that will show the policies that are system wide and be able to show all of the different effective changes, but also those college level policies should also reside in that same repository to ensure that all the effective changes are captured, because often when I have to defend a lawsuit, it's a local college lawsuit, and I have to track down their changes to policies, their own policies and procedures, et cetera. So it does make for the potential of risk, and I think that that would be one of those things that I would ask for if I could, is a really good contract management system. Excuse me, a policy management system.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I was getting at as well is, like, our system office should have a security policy just like our colleges. Like
so
an
we
active
do.
Okay.
Right. So every college, including the system office, has an emergency operation plan. And I think Lance and Chris hit on that, in that it is the application of those emergency plans and the use of those emergency plans that is critical. You know, you can have a plan. Everyone can have a plan. Whether in the moment that the plan is needed, the plan is properly implemented is really the legal question and the risk question and the liability question, in my mind.
Okay, well, Lance and Christopher, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions related to the audit plan update? Anything jump out? If not, Patsy, are you still with us?
Oh, sitting right here.
So I'm going to start with you. Any questions, thoughts you have? We're going to go around the room and then call it a day, but I'm going to start with you because you're my favorite, of course.
Of course. I've been listening intently. A couple of things I wanted to say, but somebody else kind of already said it. So one of the things I think is that Pam is, I think, spot on with the repository for policy. And I think it would be a really good idea to sort of crosswalk that out to where, you know, you kind of have the system policy in this column, and then you have if there's any change or any implication that would need to jump out at somebody for the college specific ones to the side of that. But I also think that needs to have a system built in to where it shows how we are reviewing those policies, who is reviewing those policies, because again, it's how useful is it when it's there, but it's how relevant it is. Is this something that's outdated? And I think even the policies that we have sometimes are not reviewed frequent enough to make sure that they really are applicable to the current situation in the college. So I think that right there is a primary risk that can be mitigated very quickly to get that together, because I think that would cover a whole lot for each of the colleges in the system.
Thanks. I agree. Keith, you're one of my favorites. You're next.
I'm glad to just be on the list with somebody. It's very rare. But no, I don't have any additional questions. I voiced the main one I had, and unfortunately, probably the first minute and a half, I couldn't hear anything So I'm sure I missed a little bit on the front end, but no, I don't have any additional comments or concerns right now. I think everybody's done a pretty good job.
Great. Joe, you're up. And you're one of my favorites.
Just as always, I say every time, I love seeing these reports, being at the local level. I have my piece of the pie. I see my reports. I see my own audit findings, stuff like that. But seeing the whole picture is pretty exciting, and it gives you a different perspective of what is all going on everywhere, especially on the IT side. One thing I did notice and wanted to bring up, the CISO position, I think that's amazing. They're calling it out. I think it needs to be really important. That's not just a title. I think in your thing here, it says the authority. I think that's important. That person has the authority to make change and to do their role. And secondly, with that authority, I don't know if it's mentioned in here, but the resources. We're all resource tight, but if we're going to put emphasis on this title and emphasis on the authority to do it, we need to make sure they have the tools to do it. So I just want to throw that opinion out there just to make sure.
Great.
Thank you.
Very well said. Kayla. Leah.
Because I was very confused. I heard Kayla and I heard Caleb, and I was like, maybe that's me.
You can only call part of me on the microphone.
I've just been sitting here also listening like Patsy, just taking in all the information. And so at least I feel a little more prepared when we do meet next week. So I think that'll be more a time where I'm going to be more vocal and have more things to say. But I think today was great, and I thank you all for explaining things as clear as you could for me.
And I want you to know I appreciate your participation on this and your perspective, because I think it is important. I think we, at the end of the day, as a governing group of folks, the reason we're here is because students are there. So, your voice is really important, and I do appreciate that. Candace, welcome. I don't know what you did in a past life to get appointed to the audit committee on your first year in, but we love having you here. Welcome. Any thoughts that you have?
Well, thank you for having me. No, I think really well-run meeting. I've sat through many an audit committee, so I don't know what I've done in my past lives to get the honor to sit on audit committees. But I appreciated the overview, and I liked the work on the upcoming audit plan, etc. So look forward to participating. So thank you.
Thanks, and we look forward to being together next week. Hopefully you're going to be there. And
I will. So I'll look forward to getting to know each of you.
Great, welcome. Very, very happy to have you here. And I think Chair Martin.
Yes, sir.
We can't end this call without words of wisdom.
I think we're good to go.
Did I give all the reasons?
Welcome aboard. It's the first time we've been in a meeting together. Welcome.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I was not anticipating being named to this board. It was sort of a pleasant surprise. So I have to clear some calendar space for it. So I'll be better focused going forward. So thank you.
It's worthwhile. It's a great board.
You were also serving as chair of another one of those organizations at the time, I'm sure. So
yeah, well, I serve as the chair of the Kentucky Chamber. And I also serve I will be serving as the chair of our International Airport Trade Association. So a lot of travel. So you might see me from places, outside the country from time to time.
Maybe we should have a meeting where you are sometime.
I think it would be, if you're living a good life, it would be, I'd love to have you join me.
Yes. Did I capture comments from all the regents? I didn't want to leave anybody out. And I'd like to also thank the staff leadership that's on these calls. I'd especially like to thank those who prepare me with a great outline to run this meeting. Thank you all for the great work that you do. And hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Look forward to being together next week. And Amy, you're on the line for it better be a good dinner place.
Russ, can I make one more comment?
Absolutely.
A couple people mentioned the need for a policy management system. Colleges and universities have those. I would encourage KCTCS to maybe call on their hospital president, CEO, the audit committee chair, because hospitals typically have the best policy management systems out there because they have more policies than anybody.
Yeah.
And they have one for you to
Yes.
consider would be whatever Norton uses or some other hospital.
Yeah, we would certainly be more than happy to help. And we do. Our accrediting bodies are unforgiving around those policies. So
Yep.
I'm sure Chair Martin understands that part of it too. So if
We don't have policies and procedures. They're all verbal orders.
okay, so our next meeting will occur
I
before
think
the
probably
March.
healthcare and banking would have
Banking.
probably
Yep.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. So our next meeting will happen before the March 2024 Board of Regents meeting. This concludes our agenda today. An hour and 5 minutes might be a record for any meeting that I've ever chaired. So thank you for your attention and participation and expediency. So with that, I need a motion to adjourn this austere group or astute group.
So moved.
And I'll count that as a second. Parliamentarian Duncan, please call for the vote.
Okay, and if there is no objection, we can do this by consensus. Either raise your hand or your electronic hand. All right,
Thank you
I'm
all.
not seeing any objection.
Thank
See
you.
y'all
Very
next
well.
week.
See everyone next week. Thanks again.
Thank you. You guys
Bye.
have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all.
See y'all.